Never forget that technology is at root a human activity. We human beings create technologies. We human beings are in charge of the technologies.
Dr. Friedel, is the case of AI, artificial intelligence, different than prior disruptive technologies or improvements that we talked about?
No,
No. that was
no.
a that the okay. That was a
Right.
categorical no.
I, I could have said we don't know yet, but I'm because we don't know yet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But from what I do know and from the history of the topic, I would say no. Uh, for example, I'm thinking about this question of how do we put AI into some kind of historical context. I did a little bit of digging. Thanks, I might add, to the Wall Street Journal a few days ago, which had a nice little list of books about artificial intelligence. And they were smart enough to mention a book by Joseph Weissenbaum, uh, uh, who wrote a wonderful work. He was at MIT. He wrote a wonderful work called The Computer Power and Human Reason.
Okay.
Uh, but what's interesting about this, and he talks at great length about artificial intelligence, AI. What's interesting about this book is that it was published in 1975.
1975?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So this is why I say with some
That's
confidence,
that's
no.
48 years ago. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So here we have a half century, at least a half century, of discourse about computers and intelligence and artificial intelligence and where it goes and what it will mean and all of that. Okay. Now, a half century, I think you will agree, certainly in terms of our discussion of modern technology, is not a trivial span of time.
No, it's not. No.
So, from that point of view, AI is in fact following a trajectory that we've seen before, which is to say, give us a couple of generations and maybe it'll be important. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so, now, having said that, and I don't want to be too facile about this, technology do achieve, for lack of a better term, a sort of hackneyed term, tipping points.
Tipping points.
Uh, you have alluded yourself to the automobile, to the fact that there's a period of several decades when the automobile is a rich man's toy, and some people have it, and some people are beginning gradually to adjust to the horse carriages and that sort of thing. And then we get Henry Ford and a few other industrialists who have to be given credit too, coming up with the mass production of automobiles. And sure enough, within the space of a decade or so, the automobile function within society and it's the effect that it has on American society certainly is transforming. So possibly, but only possibly, I would say, AI may be moving from this long, tortuous prehistory into something where there is a critical mass, a tipping point, if you will, where its intrusion into various parts of life is unavoidable and has significance for the choices that people make. But we don't know yet.
Let me ask the question that I asked from this specific perspective. There's much fear about AI and how it can improve itself. Not that it can be improved only, that it can improve itself based on the information it gathers. So sort of it can self-smarting, if you will. So there's this fear that it can, become dangerous to society, to humanity. Were there such fears going back in the late 1800s, early 1900s? Once in a while, you see black and white and some silent movies. I actually Googled some earlier last night of like robots attacking humans. Um,
Well, I mean, going all the way back to Mary Shelley
yeah. Oh,
and
of course. Yeah.
Dr. Frankenstein's monster, we have some concern about our artificial creations and how they can get out of our control. And certainly that's a theme that gets through the 20th century. It gets reiterated time and time and time again. Some Universal Robots by Carol Shapak was where the term robot coming from the Czech language began to make its way into modern English, and that goes back to the 1930s. The certainly in terms of robots and the robotic form of AI, that kind of concern have been around for quite a while, through much of the 20th century. And again, it's a concern that's rooted in some reality. That is to say, people are seeing machines that are becoming more, quote, autonomous, unquote, than they had before. And that too goes all the way back to the 19th century, if you really want to tease the threads of it. But certainly from the 1920s and 30s, when electric and then electronic control began to make their way into machinery and a whole host of devices, people began to be concerned about what it means to have machine autonomy. Now, what we've seen in the last, but again, it's not new, and so certainly the last 30 years, when industrial robotics had really become quite a mature field, we see concerns about what happened when the machine gets smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. Okay,
Yeah.
but as I said, that is not a new concern, and the argument can be made that some of the AI advances of the last 3 or 4 years, large language models, for example, the gigantic amount of data that can now be taken, just scraped off of the internet at tremendous scale, servers of enormous size and speed that can now process that data. It wouldn't take much to convince me that we are at the tipping point level. But what I would say, even if I concede that, is we are dreadfully bad at predicting what the consequences of that are. We really don't know. And one of the things historians can contribute to this discussion is to emphasize how bad we are at this. We really aren't very good at it. It doesn't mean that we can't try it. We have to try. We don't go into things blindly, just saying, "Oh well, what will be will be." We have to think about understanding the consequences, but our tools for doing this are very crude, and AI, I think, is no more predictable in terms of its consequences than any of the other historical examples that we can get.
Some time ago, I had a professor, another scholar such as you in our program, and he said something very interesting when you talk about predicting. He said early on, everyone was thinking how good automobiles would be for the environment because you wouldn't have all this manure and filth in the streets.
Exactly right.
Automobiles were actually pitched as like an environmental thing.
Can I give you another example, because it's even crazier?
Please do.
Because I've been doing a little bit of research on this lately. The first plastics were in fact introduced to help save animals.
Oh, come on. How?
The the earliest plastic, the first, you can change your definitions, but the first thing that was really identified and understood by people as a general use plastic was a material called celluloid.
Okay.
And celluloid was primarily initially developed as a replacement for ivory. Because people were concerned about the decimation of the elephant population as early as the 1850s. And there were other delicate populations that were also being threatened. Tortoiseshell, for example, come from a very limited range of tortoise species, the hawk-billed tortoise. So if we could come up with a synthetic kind of tortoiseshell, which we did, those turtles will be in good shape. Okay.
Oh,
So
wow, that is just wild. Wow. You're right. We are very poor at predicting what happens once we start changing things. Dr. Friedel, if you wanted our audience to remember just one point about technological improvements after everything we've talked about, what would it be? Just one point.
never forget that technology is at root a human activity. We human beings create technologies. We human beings are in charge of the technologies. Okay. And the technologies have the flaws and the foibles of human beings.
That's a good point to remember for artificial intelligence, right?
Yes.
Dr. Friedel, thank you so much for educating me and our listeners. And to our listeners, if you know of any history that could provide more perspective from the past on this subject, please share it with us and tell us what's your perspective. Thank you so very much, Dr. Friedel.
My pleasure.